But what I know is I'm feeling just fine.
My life is like a red carpet, and I'm feeling like the richest millionaire. This is my local mayor, and I'm the biggest star around here.
What's happening, fam? L.A.R. movement still moving. Subscribe or die trying. You see the thumbnail. This is a post-Jim Crow era. You know, we talk about race in America and, you know, reparations conversation and this, that, and the third. People talk about slavery. We don't talk that much about Reconstruction. But I think we need to talk about Jim Crow. Because a lot of us, us black folks, we forget we're more connected to Jim Crow than anything. But we forget to say, okay, this is why things are the way they are today. This is why we have those narratives today. A lot of that is from Jim Crow. It ain't from slavery. You get what I'm saying? Like, simple things. When you go to a restaurant and you get something to go and they got the side door, what does that remind you of? Like, if you're black and you've been around your grandparents and great-grandparents and uncles, what was that? When you went to white establishments, you couldn't eat there, so they sent you to the back door to go. You got to go. You know what I'm saying? That's what to go basically is. Jim Crow, you know, it's something we do every day. We don't think about, man, that is Jim Crow. You know, when you think about, when people talk about police brutality, that's Jim Crow. You get what I'm saying? But all the rules and laws and, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that. You better not do this. You're suspicious when you go here. You're suspicious when you go there. It's not just the vagrancy laws that happened after slavery and the sharecropping, you know, during Reconstruction. That's all really Jim Crow. And what you see is a country who wasn't raised during slavery, but the parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were alive and well and raised during Jim Crow. So the ideologies people have come from Jim Crow. They don't see anything wrong with it, you know, because it's not slavery. And it's like, yeah, I get it. That's why you see this, like, we don't, when they say church and state, separate. Jim Crow was the era where you had a black church and a white church, for sure. You know, it was the racism. But Jim Crow was the thing where you saw in the church, the white church had to deal with God accepts us for being racist. We're right for being that. You get what I'm saying? That's what Jim Crow was about. Jim Crow, two black kids can go to a Catholic school. You can't go, you black kids can't go with the white kids. That's the God don't, So some of the integration policies, Jim Crow. Your reasoning behind why things aren't integrated the way they are today, Jim Crow. Matter of fact, the president, I think it's Woodrow Wilson. He it's a rumor in a sense, but it's like it was like Reconstruction, blah blah blah. More black people got federal jobs, and his wife didn't like seeing so many black people, you know, around working. So he started just creating laws that just made sure we couldn't work, even at a federal level. You get what I'm saying? So on one end, what you see now is the federal government is the highest employer of black people, but it was a stint where it was so many laws cut that, you know, you don't think about how people didn't really have jobs like that back in the day in the federal government, because unless they was in the military. You know, if you was black, you was, you know, it was one black person every 50, 100, 200 white people, period. That was Jim Crow. You know, when people talk about the wealth gap, you know, I remember, like I said, it's two stories. One story is about my granddad. He had to buy a house through a white guy because he was black. You get what I'm saying? My granddad was a Korean War vet. Basically, you know, and that's how it was set up. You can't buy stuff because you're black, but a white dude could buy it, and basically you can buy it off of him, right? You make the payments to him. But here's the thing. It was the South. It just happened in the North too, because Chicago was notorious for this. white guy could take your money, scrap it because it's all legally their paper. So then all of a sudden, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. How come you didn't get a house? See, even the people that tried to buy houses had to deal with Jim Crow housing laws, and people, white people, taking advantage of Jim Crow and enriching themselves like that. My great grandfather, great grandmother owned land, farm, or whatever, oil rig, cattle. My great grandfather died, and basically the people in the town tried to kill my great grandmother, and she had to leave town. So all of that out of the family. And guess what? All the white people coming to the table to eat. Jim Crow, you know. And I'm speaking as a person, when I was a child, it's not like I touched my great grandmother, not my great grandfather because he had passed. But, I lived with my grandfather. You get what I'm saying? So people forget those things. Saw Chris Rock talking about how back in the day, like his mother had to go to the vet to get her teeth pulled because black people wasn't allowed to go to the dentist. So y'all don't think about, if you see black people without teeth, they didn't go to the dentist. They had to go to the vet. And that same ideology, people disdain every time we show up to a place, that comes from Jim Crow. We talk about the Rosewoods and all that type, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and all that other stuff. When people burnt down the towns out of jealousy and killed people. Chris Rock talked about that too when he says, back in the day, in the 40s, how 40s, 50s, white people just come in your house and take your stuff. If they hungry and you got food, they come in the house, take your stuff. That's Jim Crow. And to this day, like, I know white people and people who want to be white, they have this interesting thing where they want to really invade your space, even publicly. Like you can't, they belong near you and close to you and in your stuff, and to the point where it's a problem. And that's why what you see, like I say, with post Jim Crow, because what happened was part of what happened past the civil rights movement, Black Panthers, Nation of Islam, and then all the street gangs that were positive, that became negative, created an environment where you're not finna come over here and just do what you want and take what you want. You about to get hurt. And since from that point on, you've seen basically this country have a fight with, we still like our Jim Crow ways, and you're supposed to, if you ain't enslaved, your mind should still be Jim Crow enslaved, boy. And it's like, nah, we ain't doing that. So now, the police brutality that comes from Jim Crow. You got to remember, when you think of criminality, especially that time with white people, they had the police and judges in their pocket because they were all white. So when we think about crime, I think the Italians went too far in New York, and that's when people started busting it down. But for the most part, the good old boys club, that's Jim Crow. That's old people who was in Jim Crow when it's public and open, who are rich, who fat cats, who can, in their little conclaves together go, we can implement this Jim Crow policy in our businesses. They'll never know the difference because it's all paperwork. It's Jim Crow. A lot of the way the school and the school boards are made right now really came from Jim Crow, because they didn't want certain things to be taught, or they wanted, stupidity to be taught to the point that we couldn't progress as a people. Jim Crow. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times when people are talking, they're like, oh, it's this, it's that. You need to do this, you need to do that. Y'all don't realize this is just post Jim Crow. You get what I'm saying? It's just post Jim Crow. And we need to delve into it more often, because that's the issue. Like you ladies, y'all feel like, you're unprotected. And back in the day, my grandmother didn't work. She had to be in the house. Your grandmother had to be in the house because if she worked a job around those white folks, they was gonna sexually assault her. That's what was happening. And even for the women back in the day, that's what was happening to them if they went to work in these places. Jim Crow. So part of your narrative is thinking granddad is just abusive and beaten. No, he went to work and dealt with Jim Crow, so your grandmother didn't have to deal with Jim Crow, because they would beat him, maybe kill him. You gonna wind up with a light-skinned great uncle, and I should know because I had one. I thought he was on my father's side of the family. He's on my mother's because different last name because his dad was a white guy that raped my great grandmother. But it's Jim Crow. Like those people can get away with that. Fast forward to the Daniel Holtzclaw when the police was like, oh, really, that's really happening? All these complaints with these women? Jim Crow, man. But it's plenty of things we could talk about this. I might get into it in other ways, but like, share, subscribe, or die trying. Tell me what you think about it. Peace.
You ever been at the top of the universe? I'm gonna say it to you.